one of the things that is really important, and one of the things that can help, whether it's from a parental standpoint or a teacher standpoint or anybody that has contact with these children, is you see these kids over a course of time and you learn what their pattern is, what their normal behavior is to some degree, and you have an understanding of what their baseline is. And so anytime you notice or pick up on a deviation in that normal pattern is grounds for you to be curious about what's going on. So for example, you have a kid that typically very quiet, kind of flies under the radar, doesn't really say much, does well academically, gets pretty good grades, they stay out of the mix, they're not getting into fights, they just kind of are there. They're not very active, maybe not very social, not very outgoing, but they're kind of there. And then you notice that this kid's grades start to decline, or you notice that this kid is getting into conflicts with kids that they wouldn't normally get into conflicts with. Mm-hmm. That little spike, that little just deviation from what their normal pattern is enough for you to say what's going on with you. And so that question alone has so much power, because it communicates to the kid that you care and that you see them. You see them and that you notice them, and so you know that there is something deeper that's going on with them. And it's not just like, oh, you're acting out because you're a bad kid. It's like, no, there's something more that's going on here. And so whether it's a parent that says, okay, I normally have a kid that's not disrespectful to me, comes home, does their homework, and now I have a kid that doesn't want to go to school, or that is complaining of headaches and stomach aches and all of these things that have no, can't sleep, wetting the bed if you have a little kid, all of these things that have no real explanation. It's a reason to ask a question and say, what's going on? Like, you've been telling me you've had a headache every day this week, and you don't normally get headaches. Is somebody bothering you? Is something going on? Something happening at school? Is it on the bus? Asking all these kinds of questions, because it communicates, okay, I notice something is different, and I notice, there is something that's going on with you, and I care to know what it is that's going on with you. And so, once you notice, you have a choice of, how am I going to address this? How am I going to talk to them about it? And it's hard, depending on how old the child is. You might have to take different approaches. With older kids, they can be very guarded and shut down, and they don't want their parents in their business, and they don't want them to know what's going on. And so it's very easy for the conversation to get cut off very quickly if you're like, how was school today? And they say, fine. And then that's like, okay, I know what happened at school today. Nothing. And you're like, all right, I'm not getting anywhere. So it's like the approach that you take matters. So asking open-ended questions that allow for a variety of questions. Asking follow-up questions. When they say they're fine, okay, what did you learn? Who did you talk to today? Do you have homework? What classes? Was it easy? Was it difficult? Are you having any issues with any of your teachers? Those kinds of follow-up questions give you more information, because sometimes they'll say fine and you're just like, well, I don't know where to go with that, so I'm just going to leave them alone.
What I do is well, she's 5, and my nieces, they're teenagers, I'll ask them, what was the best part of your day?
Absolutely.
What was the worst part of your day? And then I will share with them, then they'll ask me the same, and I share with them, so that it's back and forth, it's engaging.
Yeah.
And kind of not trick them, but into sharing a little more,
Yeah, I asked my daughter, what made you smile today? Did anything upset you?
Yeah. And that's so important, because once you set that norm of, like, we talk about our days at home, and that's like the normal, it gives them a space to talk about those kinds of things. If something did come up that was upsetting or that bothered them, they know that you're going to ask about it, or they know that they have a space where they can talk about that. Whereas if things are very closed off, they never quite know when to bring it up, so they won't. And so unless you're going and being proactive and asking the questions, you just won't know what's going on. And that can be extremely detrimental if you don't know what's going on. And so making that a norm, they not only do they look forward to it, but it's something that they know it's a space where I can talk about how I feel, and that there's somebody that actually cares that what's going on in my day. Because school can be difficult, and not only can school be difficult, but home can be difficult too. And so that's part of the relationship that we try to establish with the kids that we work with, is just letting them know, hey, I see you. Like, I see that today, you know, normally you're upbeat and you say, hi, Miss Chelsea, how are you? When I see you in the hallway, and today you walked by me and you had your head down and I could see that you had tears in your eyes. So what's going on? And I'm not gonna let you avoid that. I'm gonna ask you a question about it. And then they know, oh, I can go to her. She's a safe person that I can talk to about what's happening in my life. And, you know, it should be the same way at home. You know, noticing when something is off, asking questions about it, and digging deeper so that, you know, it's not just something that goes unnoticed or flies under the radar with our kids. Yeah. Do you guys have questions specifically about just the work or just how to navigate trauma in our kids? I know kids experience all different kinds of things, and as parents, it's difficult to support them sometimes.
I guess this could possibly fall under trauma.
Uh-huh.
You see in all different states, they show police officers doing whatever to adults, to kids. So our kids, that's affecting
Absolutely.
our kids. So what would be a resource, or how do we talk to them about that?
So I think it's a difficult topic to navigate because the police are supposed to be people that are supposed to help us. And like the idea of like people of color don't have that experience all the time of, you know, the reality for us may be very different to the reality of other people. So it's like there is this kind of mistrust of the police.
But also, and I tell my son, I'm like, I don't want you, because I the sergeants and lieutenants in my neighborhood, they like to do things with the younger.
Mhm.
And a lot of times they're white, and I try to explain to my son, I know what you see on social media, but not every single white police officer is bad. Like,
Right.
that has to be enforced. So,
Yeah.
it's too much of it.
Yeah.
Because they're a little
see you-
fearful.
Right.
Right.
And my son is like, I said, I get it, but not every single white male police officer is bad. And I don't want you to think that.
Yeah.
So that's the flip side of that.
Yeah.
Like, it has to be a, equal.
Right. I agree. What were you gonna say?
Well, so I do a lot of community work with youth, and what we do is we have, in our summits, we have scene safety workshops. So that when they have these encounters,
Okay.
they know how to respond. And oftentimes we'll bring in a police officer to facilitate that workshop so that they can ask those questions and then they can get the answers directly from the source, the right source.
I'd like to
who
go to one,
understands.
or bring him to one.
Yeah, so
Okay.
they can understand what that police officer is facing when they're walking on the scene
Yeah.
and what their,
What their
and
mindset
what their
is.
mindset is. And then also for that child to ask the question so that they understand, like, we always say, like, in the moment, that's not where the battle needs to be taken. You go home and let mommy fight that battle. And even if you're innocent, you want to make it home safely. So just giving them those tools and resources so that they know how to navigate when they're in that space. And,
Okay.
like you said, all police officers aren't bad, but then there are those who, come in with this predetermination when they see the brown skin and the
Well, the
child with
other-
the hood on and the...
No, but the
kids
other,
that are baggy.
but also I'm noticing black police officers, it's across the board.
It's across the board,
I've been
yes.
noticing
Yes.
that.
It
Yeah.
is, yeah.
I think it's
So-
important to have those kinds of conversations
Yes.
with your kids.
Yes.
To not ignore the conversation, but to have the conversation. And whatever stance that you take is not as important as speaking with them about it and understanding what their perspective is, understanding what their thoughts and feelings are about it. Are they in a place where they're fearful? Are they in a place where they're angry? Like trying to understand their perspective as well, because it's important to teach them how to navigate, but also to understand where it is that they're coming from, so that you can know kind of what it is that their experience is. And so for a lot of them, it is fear, and I think operating out of a place of fear makes them react in a way that's impulsive or not necessarily them thinking through the situation, where they might not be in a threatening situation, but they then put themselves in a threatening situation because they are fearful. So yeah, it is something that we have to talk about. It's an unfortunate reality of the world
But
that we
when
live in right
I guess
now.
my emphasis, when we do discuss it,
Mhm.
we have to look at all
the factors.
all the factors, not
Absolutely.
just certain ones.
Yeah.
And I don't think we always do that.
Mhm.
You have to have, it has to be, everything has to be discussed.
Yeah, I agree.
The thing that you just said, though, it bothers me that we put it all, the onus on the kids. We're
Mhm.
teaching kids how to be,
Oh, absolutely.
and we're not telling
The
the
police
police officers
officers,
that
the
they
same
have,
Operating out of a place of fear as
That's
well.
what I mean, yeah.
and the idea that we put that onus on children
Mhm.
who are not aware of fight, play, they just do
Absolutely.
it. Adults do it too. We don't choose which one we're gonna take in that moment, but it bothers me to think that we give the police officers the opportunity to explain their agendas and their motives without saying that the kids are saying, I don't feel safe or protected.
Mhm.
Well,
By you.
in the, settings that we facilitate, it's an open discussion. So it gives that kid the chance to engage, to say
Mhm.
how I feel when I'm pulled over and I'm not doing anything, I'm just playing music,
Mhm.
and you have no reason to pull me over, and now I feel like I'm being harassed, and then the police officer has that opportunity to explain, what's going on, and, whatever rules or standards it is that they
So you have
apply.
both parties.
You have
That-
both
that's what I'm
parties.
talking
It's
about.
bringing both of
Yeah.
them into the same room and creating that space where they can open up. And
I think what you're saying too is that there needs to be accountability on the part of in educating
All the way
The
up and down.
police officers and law enforcement about inherent biases that
And inherent
exist.
biases, but also the fact that they can't control anybody but themselves either.
Right.
And that trying to control only escalates to that violence, and that's not the way.
Exactly.
That's not the way.
Yeah. And so it's like an education piece all around.
Mhm.
Everybody needs
So
to be
Everybody,
educated.
yeah.
I'm
everything.
thinking in particular, because I'd love to have you come in with, I'm at Riverside, which alternative ed, which obviously we've got a bunch of kids that are, by definition, volatile personalities, right?
Mhm.
But the issue that I have is I also have an SRO that I don't trust for a minute.
Mhm.
So it's frustrating to me
Mhm.
that every day of the week, he's undermining whatever connection in healthy ways could be made,
Mhm.
so that my kids are no longer safe on the streets because they now act up with him
Mhm.
because he escalates it.
Mhm.
So it's, just how do I have a community conversation that really addresses this?
And so then bringing it back
So-
to like the
so
trauma
angry.
piece, bringing it back to the trauma piece, a lot of times in situations where there is a conflict, sometimes the responding person does escalate it because it triggers the person involved further. And so you have to have awareness of part of being trauma informed is operating from a lens, kind of assuming that everyone has experienced some kind of trauma in their lives.
Yes.
And so in doing that and having that awareness, it changes the way that you approach a situation. Like, for example, I might be trying to de-escalate a situation with two children that are fighting. It might not be appropriate for me to put my hand on a child's shoulder because they may have been touched in a way that they have feel inappropriate, and that in and of itself, even though I'm trying to de-escalate them, is going to escalate them even more
Exactly.
because they're triggered. So I think having SROs and behavioral technicians and all of these and teachers and administrators that are aware of the fact that like your actions can sometimes escalate a situation because you do not know specifically what that child has experienced in their lives. So the tone of your voice, the words that you choose, the way in which you approach a situation can be triggering. And owning that and saying, and then if you do trigger that child in unintentionally, owning that piece and saying that was not my intention, and being able to take responsibility for your own action, which a lot of adults are not willing to do because it's like, I'm the person of authority, you need to
not
respect
always
me,
that
and
way.
that's not always the way.
That would be great.
So the way that we, in the past, the way that we have gathered information about our kids to know and indicate which kids need services, especially in the high schools, we've given out a survey every year. And so we have a caseload of kids that are like our normal kids, but obviously there are new kids that come into the school every year and new things change. So we would give out this survey and it asks a variety of different questions. It asks about, have you, are you being forced to work and support your family when other people in your family could also be working, but they're not. It asks about sexual abuse, it asks about physical abuse, neglect, being put down and called worthless, and all these different things that our kids do experience. And then from that information, we flag the children that need to be seen. Obviously, we can't see all of them, and we have ways of, deciphering and deciding who needs to be seen.
And we also get referrals from the teachers and administrators.
Right, teachers and administrators will be like, this kid just got into a fight, you need to check in with them, or I'm noticing that this kid is really withdrawn in class, and that's not typically how they present. Can you go check in with them and see what's going on? So we do those kinds of things, and then that's how we kind of build our caseload and end up seeing kids ultimately in the schools. But yeah, it's something that should be more standardized and should be, the norm. We can teach them math and we can teach them English.
No, we can't.
But you can't if
The
they
red
can't.
edges.
They can't.
They
If
can't.
you can't.
Yes.
If they can't get out what's going on, they can't take in any new information because they're in that fight or flight state all the time, all the time.
Right.
And you can't learn when you are constantly in fear of being harmed, of being the world being out to get you. And so one of the things we talked about in one of our earlier sessions was, one of the reasons why we thought it was important to bring the services that we provide at our private practice to a school-wide level is because it's preventative care. So obviously these things have already happened to these children, but if you can address it while they are a child, then they don't have to be the angry, anxious adults that can't navigate the world because of these experiences that have been so entrenched in their minds and in their lives that they don't know how to operate any other way than to be on the defense. And so if you can intervene at a young age and teach them, hey, I know this happened to you and I'm so sorry that I can't change it, but here are the ways that we can talk about it and we can navigate it and we can deal with it, then they can learn to deal with it so that it doesn't become the definition of who they are as a person, but it informs who they have become and it can change them in a positive way. But if we don't address these things early on, then they grow up and they don't know how to have a healthy, intimate relationship. They don't know how to be good parents. They don't know how to function in a work environment, all of these things because they've had to just survive their whole life. They haven't lived, they've survived. And it's not fair to them at all. It's hard. It's hard when you want to help and you can be the voice of reason, but if nobody else is listening, then change doesn't happen. It's really difficult. Our work is never done, ever. It's just beginning. And it takes a village and a lot of
Takes
ways, everyone to be on board. And so,
we have to really get that one day. Everybody has to be a part of it.
and that we're not working against each other, we're working for the children together. Because a lot of times it can feel like, well, why? Sometimes the parents will say, well, why are you talking to my kid about these things? And it's like, hey, I want to help you too, and I want to talk to you too. And so bringing the parents in is another important piece, but also like if I'm sitting with the kid and I'm working with the kid and then I put them back in a classroom with a teacher that's going to trigger them, we're not getting far. So everybody has to be on board. And so we do the work that we do without everybody being on board, but the results that we could have could be even better if everybody was on board. And if everybody could work together.
And we were proposing in our previous sessions that all the teachers need to be trauma informed.
I really think that needs to be enforced, all the teachers.
And so even if
from early childhood
Yeah.
all the way to high school, that needs to be enforced. It does.
Definitely. Because
So they'll know how to handle certain situations.
And it's the small things. You'll have a teacher say, oh, you should have eaten at home. And not understanding that sometimes in school, those are the only meals that these children are getting.
Exactly.
You know,
or a
and
kid is
it's-
falling asleep in class,
Right.
and because they stayed up all night because mom and dad are fighting, or because mom has to work at night and they have to take care of a sibling, and they're like, why are you falling asleep in class? And it's like, okay, one, they feel safe enough to fall asleep in
Right.
class, because being able to fall asleep somewhere means that you feel safe. And on top of that, it's not why are you falling asleep in class, it's why didn't you why weren't you able to sleep last night?
And don't say it in front of the class.
Right.
Talk to them.
Pull
to
them
the
aside.
And I stress that with my kid, my son. Don't embarrass him in front of his. Don't do that to any child.
No.
If there's an issue,
Pull
and I
them to the
talk
side.
to the side. Don't embarrass them, because that's gonna make it worse.
Yeah.
And I
It's
feel like
triggering.
they address, some things need to be addressed with the parents.
Mm-hmm.
Don't address a child about why something that they have no control
It-
over
yes.
is
Right.
happening.
Right.
You know, if you see something happening that shouldn't be, then have a meeting with
Call
that
the parent, yeah.
Don't put that kid in a space where they have to, you know,
Mhm.
make a decision or explain why
Mhm.
something is going on that's out of their control.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not as easy to get the parent on board because they get defensive and it's
Yeah.
almost
But
like,
it's
Sometimes
not-
you
it's
won't
not
get the
only-
information either if you.
That as well. I think they use that as an excuse. My daughter's in private school,
Mhm.
and there's some things that she'll come home and say, well, Miss Fortuna said this happened. Well, that's something she should come to me and say. Don't ask a 5-year-old, you know, why
She's
something.
5?
She's 5. So I think it's a culture.
Shouldn't
you know?
she
Now,
shouldn't be knowing
it has
about
been,
stuff.
but it's not anything bad, you know, but it's just small things that she'll come home and she'll say, Miss Fortuna said, why didn't I do this, or why didn't I do that? And I say, well, she needs to come to me and ask, because you have no control over that, you know? So it's not always that the parents aren't approachable, you know?
No, I'm not
It's-
saying
No, I
always,
know what
but
you're
yeah.
saying, but I think they use it as a crutch, you know?
Mhm.
Like, it's easier to go to the child, blame the child, let them take that message back home. Now they have to deal with the response of that parent.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to deal with having to go back to school, and they're the middle person, you know, like, and share that with the teacher. And I think that it's not fair to put kids in those
No, not a
positions,
5-year-old.
you know.
No,
Yeah.
kids,
Not even,
period.
not 5, not 10, not
Right.
Not any
15, not.
child.
Right, and so I think there's like, there's questions, is deciding, you know, what is a parent issue and what is a child
Right,
issue.
right.
And even if, you know, I think about there's kids that are in our schools who they don't have like adequate clothing, and they'll come to school and you can
Right.
see that they have the same clothes on that they wore and they've been worn for multiple days. And so it is difficult sometimes for a teacher to feel comfortable talking to the parent about that.
Right.
But I think to be able to just to gather the information of what is the situation at home from the kid and saying, hey, you know, I noticed that's the same thing that you wore yesterday. What's going on at home? Do you guys have? And it's all in the way you say it. It's all in the tone. It's all in the approach, because you want to communicate care. There's no judgment here. I want to know what's going on because I want to help. And even when you are talking to your kids about these issues, your tone and things, that's what matters, because they pick up on the nuance in the tone of your voice or the expression on your face, whether you are angry, whether you're open, they can feel that. And all of those nonverbal cues are going to tell them, is this a safe thing to talk about? Is this an okay thing to talk about? Or do I need to keep this to myself? Because sometimes as parents we'll ask a question knowing we want a specific response, and the way in which we ask the questions literally tells the person, if you say the opposite,
Right.
there's going to be a problem. And so that's not helpful to anybody. It's not helpful to the kid. It's not helpful to us either. It takes a willingness to step on, from an educational perspective and a systemic perspective, it takes a willingness to step outside the normal role of being in a position of power, being in a position of comfort. And so, oh yeah, we're almost done. We're done. But yeah, it takes a willingness to step outside of what's normal. And so rather than having people come to the school, us going to other places, but people are not always willing to do that because it takes strategic planning and it takes resources and it takes relationship building, and people are not always willing to step outside of their job description as it's written on paper, and it takes creativity and.
Because we've measured it, and, you know,
In
that
a
which is
specific
measured
way.
is what people will sit around for, you know? And I
Absolutely.
think that's the thing, is we've created cultures where people are like, somebody's looking over my shoulder if I'm not sitting at this desk doing this thing. You can't
That's
measure
a
being
problem.
out and doing it.
Nope. Yeah. Well, thank you guys for having this discussion. I think it's really important, and, you know, it's never over. This conversation will continue, and it needs to continue.
Quick question, have you reached out to the, I guess the district, New Haven, to bring your company?
So our program it has a relationship with the Board of Ed,
Okay,
and they
okay.
have a relationship, and so we get funding from different places.
Okay, because okay.
Yeah, to be involved in different schools, and there's some schools that want us there, and there's some schools that don't want us there, and so it just depends.
Curious to know which schools want you there and which schools
Mhm.
don't. That would be interesting to know.
And why?
Yeah.
Yeah, but thank you guys. This was great.